Well, good evening. I'm Bob Greaves, and they call me the Unconventional Pastor, and it's good to be back again with you on this Sunday evening. Particularly good to be back because we certainly were experiencing some technical difficulties, and some of the shows were actually unable to air the way we would have liked them to. But fortunately for us, we're back, and this show is starting relatively on time. And as some of you may know who've been with me on Sunday evenings, that although we've had a couple of special interruptions here, both with a physicist, Nick, who was talking to us about the nature of the universe and had a 2-hour special, and then we were also here with Eric Hovind, who was a young Earth creationist, talking to us for a special 2-hour show. Tonight, we're really back to the normal format that I usually have for a Sunday evening, where I bring on a guest, someone I think you will find just a delight to know, someone that you'll be able to relate to, someone who's been on a journey in faith and can share that with you, the courage and the changes and the ideas that their faith has brought to them. And so tonight, my guest is a gentleman by the name of Christian Luca. And so, Chris, let me welcome you to the program. Say hello to everyone.
Thank you for having me, Bob Greaves. Really appreciate being here, and good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here on the show with you folks, and it's really an honor. Thank you for having me. And,
well, I'm glad to have you here. Now, you're actually hailing in from Columbus, Ohio. Is that correct?
Actually, now Cleveland,
no,
Ohio. Moved
Cleveland.
just about 3 weeks ago. Yes, did live in Columbus for about 4 years, but now in Cleveland.
Aha, yeah. So you're in Ohio there. Supposedly one of those states where some political activity has been going on.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Indeed, it's a very big swing state, indeed.
Yeah. Well, in terms of swinging, sometimes we also have a lot of theology swinging around too, and I guess I don't think that Ohio has been a center for that, but nonetheless. Anyhow, we met online because of your interest in science. So, tell me a little bit about how you became so fascinated with science. When did this begin?
Well, great question, and I would say it really began sometime during my childhood, as I was going to school and had subjects such as physical science, mathematics. And my dad would essentially ask me questions and discuss stuff about atoms, molecules, phases of matter, and he would just intrigue me about that stuff. And I just was fascinated by the questions he asked, and really some questions just I thought would never have answers. But as I advanced in science in high school, and then on into college and some graduate school, I was able to come up with some of the answers to the questions my dad asked about certain atoms or molecules, how they can.
That's
Answer
amazing.
yet.
That sounds awesome. My dad was a very technical oriented person, and usually I had to chase after him to get him to talk technical stuff to me. He was busy, but that's awesome. Now, what did your dad do then? What was his field?
Yeah, his field. I mean, he's a doorman in New York. I mean, he studied medicine back in Yugoslavia and Romania before he came to the United States. But he still had a passion for science, even though he doesn't practice medicine here in the States. But his thirst for knowledge still is there, and that sort of inspired me to go along that path, to inquire further and further. And I went to a specialized science high school in New York by the name of Stuyvesant High School, and there's just a lot of competition and collaboration between us students there, and I really enjoyed that type of atmosphere. It felt very genuine to me, and formed some great friendships there with other students that were really interested in science and other subjects. Not necessarily faith at the time, but nevertheless, they were open to discussions, and my faith was never really rocked by my increasing knowledge of science and understanding. it was, if anything, more solidified by it, I would say.
Mm. Mm. Now, something that is unique, I don't know if it's how unique it is to New York. It could be that way in other cities. I happen to know that the New York City has a large number of high schools that are dedicated to students who seem to excel in particular areas. I know my dad, who was born in 1919, went to a school in Brooklyn that
Hmm.
was mostly for people who were really headed to some sort of technical expertise, and
Okay.
studying engineering and stuff like that in high school, and
Well,
in a
yeah.
competitive high school that But I've heard of a number of different schools in New York that are dedicated to certain fields of study. So you went
Sure.
to Stuyvesant, and that sounds awesome that your dad. If he found that medicine was something having been that he couldn't pursue here in the States for whatever reason, that he nonetheless passed his passion on to you.
Yes, indeed, and I'm very grateful to my dad for that, and to my mom, for being supportive and encouraging me. She actually wanted me to be a doctor, but I didn't want to go down that path. I was more interested in chemistry in college. Just wanted to get deeper into that, and did, but not as deep as I would have liked to in terms of a doctorate. But that's fine too.
Hmm.
Just with pressures of graduate school at the time, which was essentially just 6 years ago now, starting in 2006 at University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and being far away from them, being the only child, it was difficult. I still had
Mm.
interest in science, loved it, and I was doing something in laser spectroscopy in a group there, trying to figure out the spectra of these molecules in space that astronomers are interested in figuring out. And so they wanted, chemists in the lab to come up with the spectra of certain molecules
Now, it's
of
basically a
interest.
science where you shoot a laser through a set of known molecules to determine how the laser responds and diffuses and refracts within there. Is that what that is?
Exactly.
The
Essentially, I
signature
mean,
of it.
exactly. I mean, they were interested in certain molecular cations, charged species, charged molecules that they thought could be in space, and so they sent some laser beam in the mid-infrared region and excite the molecules that they've trapped in a vacuum or as close to a vacuum as possible, and then get out the spectrum and analyze and try to determine the vibrations and rotations going on in there, and see if that matches with any of the spectra out there that astronomers are observing with their telescopes. And so that was essentially the gist of the research that I'd undergone there. And I was attending a church there at the time, and it was helpful to look forward to that on a Sunday. It was a University Baptist church, even though my background, as I've said to many people, is Romanian Orthodox, growing up Christian Orthodox. But my father just always instilled in me this open-mindedness. So I'm not closed-minded to any denomination. Just want to learn and grow, and in the love of Christ, and I think that's key. Not really the denomination
Hmm. Well,
name.
that's
So
beautiful. That's awesome. I uh, One of the things that I think that is fascinating, and I don't want to alienate too many of our listeners who think you have to speak science to listen. But it is fascinating. A lot of people don't realize that we really know the makeup of stars and what elements are present in them because we understand the nature of light, and the light coming from them can be studied. And because of the work that you do, we are able to identify many of the chemicals that must be present in order for the light to be the kind of light we're getting. And
exactly,
and
exactly.
it's
It's
just
fascinating.
fascinating when you realize sitting here on this speck of dust called Earth in the midst of this huge universe, we have been able to scientifically determine what a lot of this is going on around us. Although there's a ton of stuff we don't know, it is
Of course,
sometimes just mind-boggling. The
it
sorts of
is.
things that we can know about what's going on and all that. But anyway, I find that stuff fascinating. I love watching the documentaries on Netflix
Uh-huh.
and on some of the things on PBS, and then listening to some of these people who study this. It's just
Yes.
what a ton of fun to think that some of these people actually get paid for it.
Yes.
That's awesome.
Indeed,
Yeah,
it is
sign me up.
awesome.
Yeah.
It's humbling too. Having come this far in spectroscopy, being able to determine based on the absorption or the emission spectrum of a certain element or molecule, what we observe out there in space for a star or a cloud, a molecular cloud. It is amazing how far we've gotten, but indeed there are still a lot of unidentified molecules out there in space which are of interest to astronomers and also, in a sense, to astrobiologists and astrochemists that are interested in life in the great universe to understand if there are other planets out there that harbor life. Um, and there's also that connection too. It's not just completely fundamental research,
Yeah.
although it's very,
I've
very
actually done a
fascinating
little bit
indeed.
of theospectroscopy myself. And I've analyzed the light of God, and I think it's made of love. That's
Amen.
that's my working theory right now.
Amen. I subscribe to the same one. Indeed.
Okay, awesome. Well, anyhow, now usually when I have people on my show, we sometimes talk about some of their earlier theological views, because many of them were going through some what I would call some rather austere traditions. But in your case, you were raised in a tradition where, although there were certain beliefs there, these weren't the sorts of things that were jammed down your throat, I take it.
That's correct. I would say. I mean, my parents they come from Yugoslavia. I was born in New York, and they had taken me to a Romanian Orthodox church in the neighborhood, pretty much on a Sunday basis, up until I started school. And when I started school, I'd gone still pretty regularly. But once I started high school with a lot of homework coming in and focusing on studies and for my future for college, just thinking about that, contemplating, I stopped going. But in terms of beliefs being forced down my throat, certainly I wouldn't say that. I would say that my father and my mother both have a devotion to going to their traditional church that they were raised in by their parents, and also open-minded towards other people that have invited us over the years, other Romanian Baptist or Pentecostal friends that my parents have had, and we've gone. We've never really rejected them at
Hmm.
all, and in that sense, we didn't keep to a certain doctrine. We
Right.
we we read the Bible at home, not because it was something that I had to do. It was something that I was interested in. I asked my father to buy me a Bible when I was like 12 or 13 years of age, and he did. It was at Barnes and Noble, and I think it was the New King James Version. And I started reading on my own in English, and forming my own views based on what I was reading, and trying to incorporate them with what I had heard in church, the Orthodox Church, and later on with what I was hearing at Baptist churches or Pentecostal, but
Yeah.
mainly Baptist, and
So
things have
there's a
shifted.
sense I get here that when you're going through this upbringing with that although there was this spiritual influence, this Christian influence, it was not turned into an issue. So when would you say you became aware of the fact that there were some of us others in the body of Christ who are just busy arguing? Uh,
Busy argument. Well, I would
we
say
got to do something.
certainly. Well, I noticed mainly when I started to become more active on Facebook. I started my account in 2007. Wasn't really active for the first year to year and a half. I'd say really I started in 2000, late 2008, early 2009, and my views had changed sort of since my childhood, being Christian Orthodox to sort of embracing some Baptist ideas and Pentecostal, but mainly with the fundamentals being Christian Orthodox. I changed sort of in graduate school with all the things going on in my life, all the pressures and such. I felt sort of like the doctrines that I was hearing, very strict, especially in the Baptist setting, were not what I was really resonating with at the time, and so I shifted towards like Christian universalism, and I found that online there were others that believed similarly to me, and they were engaged in conversations, discussions, and forums on Facebook, in which there were others that still had a mainstream Christian view, and there were very many arguments going on. I was engaged in quite a few myself about theological concerns about Savior of the world and about universal salvation, reconciliation, whether that is scriptural at all, or just wishful thinking. And I'd read some books online and also purchased some over the internet and did some more studying on my own, and even there was a time period when I had been in contact with a couple in England, David and Zoe Salem, who wrote a book, God's Plan for All. And we went through their book chapter by chapter. I had many questions for them. They were very patient with me, and just discussed. And just, I think that was a time of transition, and I was growing then. But a lot of arguments still ensue to this very day, but I don't tend to try to dwell on them. I don't want to tell anyone, well, you're wrong because you believe the way you believe, and I don't want people to think that I'm right in what I believe. I just feel that, whatever a person may believe, they have a right to that, indeed. That they have the freedom of choice to believe that, certainly, and, I just come out of a loving perspective to say, I don't see it your way. If you see it that way, that's fine. We can still be friends. We can still converse and discuss, and that's fine.
No, I have an interesting question. It's just interesting to me anyhow.
Yep.
Your fascination with science and with chemistry and physics, in what role do you see that actually played then in keeping you moving in the direction that you were moving in?
Well, that's a very good question, very deep indeed. I would say that with learning chemistry and physics, which are very demanding subjects, both very quantitative and qualitative, but a lot of math involved, stuff that is mind-boggling, really, when you really think about it, and dedicating so much time in high school, college, and graduate school towards studying so profusely, so meticulously, I found that there are many things that are explained by physics and chemistry which are remarkable. We are, in a sense, coming to a place where many of the superstitions that have been shared by a great deal of humanity over the last many centuries indeed are being dispelled by both chemistry and physics. But at the same time, having a greater grasp of what's going on around us, of this reality, it's only a sliver, I believe, of what reality is, and it's been able to humble me to the point of, yes, we have so great a handle on how stuff works mechanistically in the universe, but that to me, although it humbled me, at the same time it kept me wanting more in the sense of, well, yes, I understand the mechanism of how an organic chemistry reaction might happen, or how a spaceship might get into space, how it might get out of Earth's atmosphere and go and rotate, or I'm sorry, around a certain planet or moon or satellite. That might be very fascinating indeed, very helpful for people to do what their jobs are out there at NASA, for example. But it still is missing something, and I think what it's missing is the key of meaning. You know, science does a great job indeed of explaining how things happen, and not as great a job at why things happen.
Hmm.
I would say, and maybe they do. I mean, maybe I should rephrase in saying science does do a great job of explaining why things happen on a proximate level or proximate cause sort of level, meaning we see things on a level where we can explain why the sky is blue because of the refraction of the sun's rays.
Right.
Sun's rays through the Earth's atmosphere, essentially, and there's an equation that explains that with the wavelength of light. That's fine, that explains it very beautifully, which we haven't been able to explain before until the 20th century. But I'd say, like, what science lacks is I think the ultimate cause, and I think what science and learning more science, it's humbled me in the sense that, we have to define things, and we all have to agree that this is the definition that we operate upon, and this is where we're going to go with in this field, and so we're going to get results out of it. But what I'm trying to say is that I think the assumption that science must make inevitably is that the universe is indeed comprehensible, intelligible,
Hmm.
and it has patterns that are discernible by us through our intelligence that we, I believe, have been endowed by our Creator, by God. And I think that's an epistemological assumption that science must make, that the universe indeed is comprehensible. That I think even Einstein said one time that the most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that indeed it is comprehensible. Um, and so that begs the question, how is it that we can indeed have this capacity, just beautiful capacity to continue to understand the universe in such a deep level, and still there's an infinite amount of stuff out there that we don't know.
Yeah.
So,
Now, part of what I heard a theme here that although you didn't come out and say it, what I heard is you're having this fascination with that which is knowable and that which can be looked at and studied, and yet at the same time, there is this awareness that, well, is that all there is? And hopefully that's not it. I mean, as much it's kind of like, if you were to go to an eternal fun park, you might have fun on the roller coaster for the first week, and you get to study various things that can take you really deep into the trek of what is comprehensible, but then it still leaves you there, and of course then science, in some ways, although you pursued it and you found yourself capable of this, and that it was something that is in so to speak right up your alley,
mhm.
you really needed more than that.
Yes, indeed, and I still do. I still do. I think science will always be a passion for me, regardless of my faith. But actually, I shouldn't say regardless of my faith. I mean, I should say complementary to my faith, because really, I think um, the successes and failures of science throughout the centuries, I think, are made possible that we've been endowed with intelligence
Hmm.
by God. We've been given a brain to use, indeed, and we are using it generally on a civilization level on this beautiful earth. And the lacking that science has is especially poignant, I think, when scientists, especially materialist scientists, talk about, well, even when they talk about, let's say, for example, human emotions like fear, love, passion, and such, they tend to reduce it to, well, it's just the dopamine that's being secreted, the neurotransmitter in our brains, and the norepinephrine and other neurotransmitters, the interaction of them in our brains. I refuse at the bottom of my heart and mind, both, to accept that, it just these flare-ups of biochemical reactions going on in our brain and the rest of our body that could explain.
There's actually an analogy that I think that maybe you would find this meaningful. If we were mechanics and we're looking at this car engine that's in this car, and we've got the hood open and we're examining things, and the engine is revving, and we study this engine and we begin to see how the carburetor is actually making some adjustments that allow more fuel and oxygen to come in, and we begin to describe that this engine is revving because of all this variations going on of increased oxygen and fuel, but we don't stop to say, there's some guy behind the wheel who's pumping the accelerator. There's a sense in which I think that I think the human brain definitely is, not to put away all that psycho science, but we don't know that, this is merely the way the apparatus puts into effect these things. This isn't necessarily the only explanation for it.
Precisely. I mean, I think it's like I read somewhere that scientists have always been searching for the ghost within the box being the human body, and they haven't found it. But
right.
I don't know that they will ever find it necessarily using the tools that we have currently or in the future. I don't know that the manifestation of what I believe is spirit, which is not probable by scientific methods, will ever be manifest within our physical plane of existence, and I don't know. I mean, it's I think the most fascinating thing that I've seen in science that has gotten close to meeting up with spirituality and belief is the study of consciousness. I'm not very much in depth into that, but I've been reading a bit and seeing that scientists are trying to measure consciousness, however they can, and not successfully thus far. At least, there's not a consensus about that. But I think, in the 21st century and beyond, if scientists can probe somewhat successful what consciousness is, I think that will be sort of the joining or the union of science and spirituality, which I think many people have been awaiting.
Now, I would even go so far as to say, because you've studied both chemistry and physics, you've also had to take a look at the way statistics are used in the study of chemical reactions and particularly in physics. And one of the things that I think that we find that people who are not necessarily scientifically oriented may not realize that the concept of correlation when it comes to statistics, that when we see that two things are related, we can demonstrate statistically that they are related. But one of the things that I found was so fascinating, when I studied statistics, I studied it in a math environment, and then I later studied it again in a human development environment and in a psychology environment. And one of the things I found that really bothered me was that when we were studying it in a psychology environment, we were violating this law of correlation, that just because we have demonstrated that there's this relationship between these two factors, we do not know what that relationship is until we can somehow actually uncover it. And many
Yes.
times what we end up doing with is that we realize there's these two things that are related, but we really don't know how. And I think that sometimes we jump to conclusions that, well, obviously, if these two things are related, it's because this does that, and that's why. And we don't realize that many times, more often than not, we end up being totally wrong when we finally get down
Hmm.
to the bottom of it.
Right.
And I think that because of that, we tend to overstep it. And I think that we will find that the apparatus of the brain, the apparatus of the mind, and the
Hmm.
apparatus of self are operating on correlations, that the body correlates to what we're doing. And as a result of this, I think that the biggest difficulty we're going to have in defining consciousness and defining self will be trying to find the difference between that which is correlate of the apparatus of our biology and that which is really going on with who it is we may be immaterially. And
Right.
that's just, to me, impossible to work with, but fascinating to think about. Now, let
Indeed.
me move on to something slightly different here, if we can.
Sure. Sure.
You're involved online in a couple of different
Yes.
forums and groups that you've opened up. Tell us a little bit about some of the groups that you've been participating in that deal with science and faith.
Sure. Yes, indeed. I started a group on Facebook about 8 months ago or so called "A History of the Interaction of Religion and Science." And I started it mainly because I thought there would be an interest in it from some of my Facebook friends that I've been commenting on their posts, and they've been commenting on my posts with some of the stuff I've posted, some of the stuff they've posted. And I've read up on a lot of stuff between the interaction of science and religion online, and just find it fascinating because I think in this age in which we live right now, there's this sort of dichotomy between religion and science, science and religion, in at least sort of popularly speaking. Um, Maybe not so much on a micro level, but more on a macro level, in that there's some sort of conflict, diametrically opposites, between science and religion. And I thought, well, I don't see that operating in my life as such. And so I thought, well, let me start a group where we can get discussions going on with people, with folks that
How
might
many
be
are in the
interested in
group?
this. Sorry.
How many are in the group?
In the group, about 52 to 53, I think either 52 or 53 members right now. And I mean, it's growing slowly. I don't look at the numbers, it's not important really, the numbers, but I think the quality of the interaction between the folks is very high.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very respectful atmosphere. There's even a gentleman from the UK. He's an atheist, and I invited him to the group. I met him through a theoretical physics forum on Facebook, and he decided to join, and he's been very active ever since. And he poses some great questions now and then to all of us in the forum. Sometimes I don't answer, sometimes other folks do answer, and the questions he poses sometimes are about, well, how can you believe this? How can you, say you believe such things? If you have a scientific background, how can you ever believe such things about what you believe? And usually I come at it, and others come at it, well, it might sound ridiculous to you, but really coming at it from a loving perspective, and really the idea of universal reconciliation to me, and I've noticed other folks in the group. Seems like a lot of folks in the group are people that believe in this universal reconciliation, as the scriptures talk about. When it comes to injustices that happen on Earth, like for example, what happened in Indonesia, 8 years ago with the tsunami around Christmas time, 7, 8 years ago. Many hundreds of thousands of people just perished
Yeah.
because of that. And like an atheist or an agnostic would ask, well, how is it that your God is loving? You claim that God is love, and I say, well, I certainly do not understand God's plan in all of its details, and I don't think any of us do, frankly. But I do understand that if universal reconciliation is true, and I do believe that it is, that all is working for the good of all, and we might see something in the now here with our very limited lenses, filters, as being very negative. But generally, we do see that out of something bad, something good comes out of it afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this sort of
I would
principle.
even, I would even suggest that another possibility that you might even entertain is the idea that I find, in reconciliation, in the whole notion of restoration, that that I think it's key to see a difference between whether or not something happened in order that a particular restoration can take place, and see a difference between that and seeing that this thing happened and it had absolutely no purpose or meaning in happening, but it did happen.
Mhm.
However, we can fix this, and that the grace of God can be such that no matter what happens, we can find a way to use this if it's there, and we have to, and also in recognizing that if there is going to be an ongoing restoration, that if
Mhm.
that restoration is going to be real and authentic, there's a sense in which, in spite of what horrible things may inadvertently occur, even if they had no purpose or meaning, not all is lost. In fact, nothing in the end would be. Kind of like, if some, like this guy who was recently in the theater there, who shot up so many people, and he went in, he's wearing
Yes.
this big suit. Some people
Yeah.
might say, what is God's purpose in this? I'd say, I don't think God had any purpose. This guy who went in there, he did it. He had a purpose, and
Yeah.
but all the horror that came out of that, there are good things that can come out of that, not because that is the reason it happened, but because this is the amazing thing about goodness is that, and the amazing thing about the value of human beings, that you can get this tremendous restoration and development out of people who have just gone through horrible loss and terrible situations. So that I would even see
Yes.
that, things don't even have to have a purpose necessarily to be then just enveloped into this restoration. Now, yeah, there's a number of things that I see that have gone on. And now, is there another site though that you also keep going? I can't remember. I know you have the history of the interaction of religion and science, but is there
Yes.
another page you've also been taking care of? I can't remember. I know
I,
that's where
I,
I've mostly
I
mentioned.
don't, I'm not the administrator of another page on Facebook. I do engage in some other Facebook groups, such as Christian Universalism or Christian Universalist Association,
Mhm.
which I believe is handled by Mr. David Spatz, formerly Eric Stetson. But I don't, administer any other Facebook forums or groups. Just engage in other groups. I do post a lot of stuff, generally speaking, on this theme of religion and science, how they interact, and that's really my focus. I think it's the focus because I have experienced both ongoing in my life, and I would hope that others who have just experienced only the scientific perspective could open up too. But that I believe, of course, is in God's time, and I don't stress out about it.
Mhm.
um, but I really like discussing just seeing where people are coming from, what their stages of spiritual development are, is how I see it. I don't think we're all at the same spiritual development, so I don't see any reason necessarily to really belittle or condemn anyone for what they believe. That's just it's out of the question. So
Now,
always.
When I look at your page here, but I actually have Facebook up here, and I was looking at the page. I find that you post often some interesting articles, various different blog articles.
Yes.
You got Carl Sagan videos. You've got things about scienceandbelief.org, and just some. In fact, I've found that there's so much there that I just don't have the time to read all of it. Although I find it often very very interesting. But just tell. I'm going to mention to our listeners some things. Your recent post here was even you have one here. Let's see that the people have been commenting on that. You first posted this on September 26th, and people are still talking about it. I think this religion, science, and easy answers from NPR.
Oh, NPR News, yes, indeed, blog.
Yeah. And then there's other things where, you've shared more recently, education's effect on religion. You've got another one here where the musings of a blog, a mysterious shift of a Saturday reprise. I didn't get a chance to read that.
Indeed. That one I came upon because I read a book borrowed from the library called Skeptics and True Believers, I think was the name of the book, by a physicist by the name of Chet Rimo. I'm not sure how the pronunciation is there. But I read his book and I was very fascinated. His upbringing, Chet Rimo's upbringing, was Catholic, and he had studied physics at college, and his beliefs had changed from his upbringing, from his Catholic upbringing, and nevertheless, he still had in his life, and still has in his life, this wonder of it all. His wonder in that book that I read, Skeptics and True Believers, was like how we can understand what's going on in the nucleus of our cells. The biochemical reactions that are going on at very, very great speeds, and that to him is sort of a spiritual science, so to speak. The wonder of it all, just being able to take that in. It's not readily, believable to anyone and everyone in the world when we talk about DNA. Unfolding and being transcribed and translated into proteins and such, that's something that's hard to see, to be tangible. But people go in the laboratory, do painstaking work there, and they come up with the stuff, which is fascinating. And
ask
that
you,
he sort of goes at, Please go ahead.
Sometimes when I start to talk, or when you're talking and things drop out, it's hard to tell whether I'm talking over you or starting when you finished. Sorry about that. As I look at your page, I want people who may find that they're interested in reconciling concepts of science with religion, that they might really check this out. Your page there being a history of the interaction of religion and science. By the way, it reminds me a lot of of Dr. White's book. I mean, the title there. Probably you've read.
Was, if I recall correctly, Skeptics and True Believers by Chet Rimo. I could spell Rimo for you. It's Raym as in Mary O.
Right.
And Chet is Chet. So I just looked up his name online and found that he has a blog, Science Musings, and I just find it very refreshing, his blog, and I find a lot of information about science and religion through Cambridge University Press.
Hmm.
They have. I don't have the website in front of me, but they do have this Faraday sort of lecture or seminar series where one can subscribe to that and get articles in your inbox, in one's inbox, and see what's going on in the world of science and religion, and that's where I tend to get my information and find new interesting things to explore that
Yeah. Now,
otherwise probably wouldn't.
have you read Andrew White's book called, A History of the warfare between theology and science in Christendom?
I have not. I have posted about it, indeed, but I haven't read it myself. All that I've learned about it is that it was a book, if I'm not mistaken, written in the 19th century, mid 19th century, and which was sort of a polemical that was going on. That he sort of had an axe to grind, so to speak, with religion, and so. If I'm not mistaken, what was he not a chemist by trade?
I don't recall exactly what. I know that he was for a while there president of the university, and how he got what his trek was getting there. But the title of his book reminded me a lot of the title of your page there. A history of the interaction of religion and science, but from
Ah,
a far more positive standpoint. In recognizing that, although I would have to admit that I think that many times people from rigid religious backgrounds have really been a stick in the eye of science, that there are people such as you and many others who are fascinated by the way that these two just go together so well. And we're coming to the end of our hour here, and I was
mhm.
curious if you would share with us a few things about. You've certainly found that as you've come to a place of faith, that
Mhm.
you have no problem with putting science together with faith in Christ,
Mhm.
with faith in the reality of the love of God, and things like that. Where do you see yourself moving with this, or do you just see yourself kind of riding along and allowing this to do what it's going to do, or you have any vision for putting this out anywhere else?
That's a very good question. I've thought about this, contemplated about this myself. Honestly, for the time being, for the moment, I would say that just writing about science and religion on Facebook, and perhaps starting my own blog about it. I haven't started a blog about that. I had one before about just current events, about news, but really I'm very interested in this interaction, and I mean it could eventually lead to enough material that I would compile it into a book. I'm not sure yet, but I'm open to that idea. I think there is still a lot that I have to learn, though. I mean, I'm learning certainly as I go along, and I think, though, to put in book format, it would take a few more years. Of learning and discussing with people, and maybe just also interviewing people in person as well would be a nice thing to do. I haven't done that. It's been over the internet really that I've engaged in this discussion, and it's highly fascinating. And I just don't know where it'll lead, but a book is something that I've thought about for this. Not that there haven't been many books written on this topic already. And one might ask, well, what could I have to possibly add? I mean, you know,
I think it would be helpful if we somehow redeem the ability of science and religion to actually have a very good relationship, and without having to pretend that it's always been good.
Yes,
that I
that's
can
right.
see
I
that is
think that's
benefits.
very accurate to say. I mean, I'll say one last thing. I mean, what I think of, I mean, I'm also a student of history. I minored in history in college at Stony Brook, and I remember reading, about the Renaissance in Italy, and later the Protestant Reformation, and then later followed by the Scientific Revolution in Europe. I mean, people were going back to the ancient texts, Greek and Roman, and excavating them and reading them and trying to understand what the ancients thought. And then the Reformation followed with Martin Luther posting his theses on the door of the Wittenberg Cathedral, the 95 Theses, and opening up this sort of discussion that wasn't really existent because the church essentially had a monopoly on the interpretation of the Bible. And so, you know, with this opening, this door that came about through Martin Luther, people started to discuss the Bible, and I think you know that also set the stage,
Hmm.
I would say,
Yeah.
for the scientific revolution to take root. And
In some ways, it did. Yes. Well, we're now out of time, but I
okay,
want to thank you for being on the show, and I'd like to kind of cap it off by telling our listeners that in many ways, I think that you're just a delightful example of a person whose faith grew up in a situation where a lot of the hostility that some of us have had in religion and intensity of dogma and things just was not your story, and that in a sense that your fascination with science has been something you have found to be just completely compatible with also a faith in a loving God. And I'd like to encourage our listeners to recognize that this is a very healthy approach to science. That to find it fascinating, to look into things like you began talking about, such as the laser spectroscopy. Did I say that right? I didn't say that right.
that's
But
correct.
anyway,
You did,
okay, but
indeed.
when you're looking at that to go into the detail of all of this interesting knowledge and yet still find that this is not in any way a problem in believing in a God who not only loves you
Yes.
but loves all, so that you
Well,
see him as the God who would reach out in care and redemption, restoration to all people, that no matter what's going on here, uh, you know, as much as there's a tremendous amount of horrifying things going on, that there's hope for each of us and value in each of
there
us,
always
and
is.
and each of us are lovely in that way. Well, anyway, we're totally out of time. Thank you so much for being here, and we'll talk to you soon and see you online. And you take care. And this is
Thank
Bob
you very
Graves,
much for
the
having me.
unconventional pastor, saying we'll see you on Wednesday.
All right. Thank you. Good night.